This podcast is part of E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience.
Hello and welcome to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast that's going to catch you up on all the single discipline action this weekend. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Let's talk about some college equestrian. The sport took a week off for Thanksgiving. Normally Thanksgiving would have been the end of the fall, but this past weekend we had one more meet, and we're going to talk about it in our meet recaps. So we only have one meet to look at, a single discipline meet between Berry College and Sewanee. On Saturday afternoon, the Vikings rode their first equestrian meet of the season at Sewanee. Berry was the last equestrian team to ride in a meet, so we did not have a lot to go on beforehand. The Vikings do return a fair amount of talent from last season, enough to be ranked in the middle of the pack among the single discipline teams. Their opponent, Sewanee, returns almost no one from last year's campaign, but that is kind of turning out to be not such a bad thing for them. The Tigers rode a pair of meets previously at Sweetbriar and at Lynchburg. They lost both of those, but they scored a point in each and they rode pretty well overall. So going in, I felt like Berry had the advantage. I predicted Berry would win 5-3. Let's see what really happened. The flat was up first, so we'll do that first. The matchups, we didn't have a lot of data to go off of there. It looked like Berry would be favored in 2 rides, Sewanee favored in 1, and there was a 1 toss-up. This was a 4-on-4 meet, by the way. But instead, Sewanee won 3-1. Clara Juckett got her point for Sewanee, as we predicted, and Berry's Elizabeth Wenred got the lone point for Berry. She was favored, so that tracks there. But the event really hinged on Summer Piley and Emma Samath getting those 2 points for Sewanee. Samath won MOP for her ride, so that was a big one for her. So with that, Sewanee was up 3-1 at the half. Things looked good for the home team. The favorites in fences, again, it sort of favored Berry in 2 of the rides, Sewanee in 1 of the rides, and there was a toss-up. But once the rides were done, Sewanee had once again taken the event 3-1. Now, Berry's Marceline Leverett was favored. She got her point. It was the lone point for the Vikings in the event. Samath was favored to get her point. She did get it for Sewanee, but it was Jenna McAmis and Campbell Flanagan's points that really closed the door on any Berry comeback and won the day for the Tigers. So Sewanee gets a really nice 6-2 home win. This is their first win of the season, and it looks like they have 2 more home meets in the spring, and those are winnable meets for them. So this is a really good way for them to go into the winter break. For Berry, obviously they lost, but this was on the road. It's very possible they could have won this meet if it had been in Berry. These teams are probably pretty close in terms of talent. It's just unfortunate that we don't have a lot of home-and-home meets between these smaller schools. We'll probably get more as time goes by, but for now, Berry's going to have to just take this loss knowing that they're still a dangerous team for other teams to face. Now, normally this is the point in the show where I would talk about the Golden Score Sheet Awards, but since we only had one meet this week and the official score sheet for that meet hasn't posted yet on the NCEA website, we're just going to skip that. Basically, there are 3 teams that have hosted meets and they've turned in perfect score sheets. Everybody else has deductions. So we went through all that last week. I'm not going to go through it again, but we'll just see how things go in the spring. But basically, just put zeros instead of blanks and your score sheet's probably going to be pretty good. So with that out of the way, let's roll right into the official Auburn Elvis College Equestrian Rankings. Now, these are just the single discipline rankings. We did the dual discipline rankings last week, so this is just for those smaller schools. Number 1 is Lynchburg. The Hornets won at Dartmouth and at home over Bridgewater and at home over Sewanee. Then they lost at South Carolina and at Sweetbriar. They're the 2-time defending national champs, and that South Carolina loss is really nothing to look at just because every single discipline team would lose that meet. And frankly, that road loss at Sweetbriar is pretty respectable too. It was close. It was a tiebreaker loss. That Dartmouth road win is the best road win of any single discipline team in the country, and that is why they are number 1. It's pretty much for that Dartmouth win. Okay, so the number 2 team is Sweetbriar. The Vixens have 3 home wins over Bridgewater, Lynchburg, and Sewanee, plus a road win over Sacred Heart. They have 1 loss, which is at Dartmouth, and this is a tiebreaker loss, so that's kind of why they slipped just below the Hornets into the number 2 spot there. But everything's fine for Sweetbriar. They're going to be fine. At number 3 is Dartmouth. The Green opened with a road loss at Lynchburg, but then had 3 home wins over Sweetbriar, Bridgewater, and Sacred Heart. So this is actually a great resume, and I think I've mentioned this before, that because of that Sweetbriar win, even though it was close, it was a tiebreaker, it was probably so significant for Dartmouth that they are probably going to get into Ocala now, just on the strength of that win. Now, they've done other things too, but that was eye-opening. So they're going to have 3 meets against dual discipline squads in the spring. One is at Auburn, so good luck there. You're going to need it because nobody beats Auburn at Auburn. Don't know if you knew that. But even if they lose all of those dual discipline meets, or the single discipline meets against dual discipline teams, their fall was so strong that they're probably going to stay in the top 4. Really, not one, but 2 teams below them would have to just go absolutely nuts to dethrone Dartmouth right now. So we'll see how that goes. I don't think it's going to happen. Now, speaking of the national championship tournament, there are only 4 spots. So if those 3 teams we just talked about, if they get in, that means that everybody else is pretty much vying for this one final spot. The first team to talk about to get that spot possibly is number 4, Sacred Heart. The Pioneers beat Bridgewater at a neutral site. They lost at Sweetbriar and at Dartmouth. Now, those losses are not bad. They're road losses. That's understandable. The win over Bridgewater is good, too. The Pioneers are probably going to take a loss or 2 on the road in the spring, so they're going to need a good conference tournament performance to stay in the top 4. Okay, so on we go. Number 5 is Swanee. Yes, the Tigers jump up from the bottom of the rankings and land in the number 5 spot. As we said, the Tigers have 2 road losses at Sweetbriar and Lynchburg, and of course, they beat Berry at home just this last week. So, decent start for Swanee. They're going to want to follow that up with a strong spring and probably a good conference tournament as well if they want to get to Ocala. Okay, now let's look at some teams that have a little bit more work to do. Number 6 is Bridgewater. The Eagles have 4 losses so far. They're all on the road at Sweetbriar, at Lynchburg, at Sacred Heart, and at Dartmouth. They're really going to need to win some this spring or have just an amazing run in the ODAC tournament to get into that top 4. So we'll keep our eye on them for that. Number 7 is College of Charleston. The Cougars' only meet was a loss at South Carolina, and like we said with Lynchburg, anybody would lose at South Carolina. Looking ahead, the first-year squad is going to have some more meets against dual discipline teams. Those will probably be losses as well. The Auburn one will definitely be a loss. But there is a neutral site meet against Bridgewater that is winnable for them. So right now, things look like a long shot for them to get to Ocala. But I think for Charleston, this being their first year in the sport, I think they're just getting their feet wet and getting used to the head-to-head format. And the final spot in the rankings, number 8, goes to Berry College. The Vikings lost on the road to Swanee, and they'll actually get another chance to ride against Swanee in the spring. Plus, they have some even more challenging meets. So, kind of like Charleston, the Vikings here, they're going to need to get some shocking upsets in the spring if they want to get to Ocala or at least get into the conversation. Okay, so that was all the fall action. The next meet we have to look forward to is going to be between the 2 remaining undefeated dual discipline teams, Delaware State at TCU. It's on January 25th. There are other meets that weekend, but this is the next one coming up, and I won't go into it right now, but I'll just say that we'll probably do a spring preview show just to get everybody ready for all those first week meets coming up in January. So that's the show. Kind of a short one. I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. I hope studies are going well for all the athletes. I hope everyone gets some time home for the holidays that are upcoming. Also, I'll give a shout out to all the staff members at the various schools. The horses don't go home for the holidays, and somebody's got to take care of them every day, so good job to all those folks making sure that the little details are getting taken care of there. That's all for this episode. I am your host, Auburn Elvis. Thank you very much for listening, and war horses.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.